Welcome, everyone, and thank you for being with us for this online event with Michael Mead, Finding Ways to Make a Change. My name is Corin Linfield, and I work with Michael here at Mosaic, the nonprofit organization that he founded. First of all, we just want to extend our gratitude for being with us, but also for your generous support of our work, for your donations to this event, and so we really appreciate support on many levels. This is certainly a time with much great change in the world, and it can easily feel overwhelming, and so we hope this event will help you understand how to be with those changes outside and have a better sense of how to change things inside to navigate and find a deeper sense of ground and meaning. There'll be opportunities to share questions with Michael. We invite you to share concise questions in the chat or Q&A area, and we'll share a selection of those with Michael during the event. This event is also recorded, and we'll be sending out an email to everyone with a link to the recordings, audio and video, so you can rewatch, re-listen as much as you like. So again, thank you for being with us, and I'd like to welcome Michael to begin tonight's event. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Corin. Welcome, everyone. I must just say to begin with, I'm coming to this with a heavy heart, and that's largely because of the war that has broken out. When we announced this event, we were in the midst of the crisis in Minneapolis, where the the wild attack on immigrants and American citizens and everything was going on, with the idea of expelling all kinds of people out of the country. And it was so disruptive and so troubling. And I'm proud of the people of Minneapolis of figuring out how to act as neighbors and stand up for meaning and truth and protecting each other. And that had, a good outcome, and it was great. But since then, our country, United States, along with Israel, has started a war with Iran. And I don't want to get into a bunch of politics and all. I just am against war. And I guess I've been against war since I got drafted into the Vietnam War a long time ago. And when I realized it wasn't right and said I wouldn't do it, that led to me going to jail. And then when it turned out I wasn't a good prisoner, that led me going to solitary confinement and for a long time. And it was the most life-changing thing I ever experienced. And it was a more than one brush with death. And it was also a kind of brush with how dismissive, violent, and destructive human culture can be, how inhumane it can be. And then I came out of that trying to understand, how do I heal myself? How do I find my way back into a culture that's at the time, in a way, was quite willing to dismiss me or worse. And that led me to studying, I was already studying mythology, but it led me to studying psychology, and how to deal with loss and trauma, and also how to survive in times of conflict. And unfortunately, the times of conflict have come back again and again, and here we are in a new one. And what happens in the anguish that I wind up feeling, memories come back, and some of the memories have to do with people that I've worked with, who are meaningful and become like the companions in life. And one of them was William Stafford, the great American poet who died maybe 20 years ago, who was just a sweet man and close to the earth and close to the soul and the heart. And he was against war. And he once wrote a book called Every War Has Two Losers. And I think there's truth in that. No one really wins a war. At the level of the soul, something gets lost for everybody. And now I think the nature of this kind of war, which is, use of all kinds of radically heavy weapons and missiles and all that, there's more than two losers. That this is going to produce not destruction on the face of the earth, and not destruction in various areas and the loss of life for all kinds of people. This is destructive to the soul. That's part of what I feel. And again, I don't want to go into a whole bunch of politics. I'm just saying why I have a heavy heart. And so then because of all that destruction and all, and because of the theme of the evening, how to find ways to change, and even how to find ways to survive and change meaningfully. I want to start with a song. I don't always do that, but I learned to do that in working with various kinds of indigenous people and tribal people who would always start an event where people came together with a song. And the fact that we don't have traditions like bringing everybody together through song, uh, creating unity through harmony, literally, we don't get many experiences of being all together. And now most people think that the world is divided and people are divided against each other, and one side is good, the other side is evil, and all kinds of familiar old mistakes that do damage to everyone. And so this is a song I learned from Malidoma Somé of the Dagara people in Burkina Faso, West Africa. And traditional people would have songs for all kinds of meaningful things. And this is their song about the world going wrong. And I think one way to understand what's happening now, not just the war is heightening the sense of it and deepening the pressure we all feel, but there's also, nature continuing to being under pressure and kind of unraveling at all kinds of levels that we also feel. And so what I learned with tribal people is, okay, in the midst of that, we come together and sing. That part of the human natural expression is song. And so this is their song. It's called Azisona, The World Has Gone Wrong. Azisona, Eze makuli, azisona, te samani badina, azisona, eze makuli, azisona, te mamani badina. Azisona, eze makuli, azisona, te samani badina, azisona, eze makuli, azisona, te mamani badina, azisona. The world has gone wrong. Eze makuli. Someone take us home. Azisona. The realm has gone wrong. Te samani badina. We're losing our fathers. Azisona. The world has gone wrong. Eze makuli. Someone take us home. Azisona, te mamani badina. We're losing our mothers. Azisona, eze makuli. Azisona, te samani badina. Azisona, eze makuli, azisona, te mamani badina, azisona, te mamani badina, azisona, te mamani badina. Azisona. Someone take us home. It's like you can't even be in your home if you're in this kind of uproar. I mean, you're in your home, but you're kind of feeling the tension in the world, the weight of everything coming down. And then there's the news of people dying, and some people can hear that and not feel it. And some of us feel it right inside in the heart and in the soul. I was studying the the Sa people of the South Sahara. And they have this beautiful image that each heart is tied by an invisible string to one of the stars in the heavens. And when a person dies, the star that they are tied to falls from the sky. So that each time a person dies, there's one less star in the sky. And to me, that's just beautiful. In other words, we need images to understand what the effects are, because in the end, there will be not just one loser, but many losers. Speaking of dying, I can't really go much further without wanting to honor our old friend Coleman Barks. Coleman Barks is the premier translator of the poetry of Rumi, and I've known Coleman. I couldn't even tell you how long, maybe 40 years or something like that when I first met Coleman, and he passed several days back. And so to me, that was a star falling from the sky, the star of the beautiful mind and the beautiful sound of the speech of Coleman Barks and the way he brought the language of Rumi from 13th century Farsi into becoming the best-selling poet in the United States for quite a while. And and so he was a sweet man. He was a wonderful man, and he did a he was a poet of the heart, just as Rumi is. And so I want to read two Rumi poems translated by Coleman Barks in honor of the great spirit and the inner spark of Coleman Barks. First one's called "The Light Inside This Darkness." Listen. Sin is not found so much in moral vice as in those constraints that curtail your spontaneity, in the fetters that close the interior door of your soul, in the rules that encourage falsity, and in the beliefs that obscure the rich heritage of our shared nature. Sin is in whatever betrays the primordial nature already inside people, for whatever thwarts the flowering play of the blossoming self within, that's a sin. So that's straightening out some of the moral ideas and getting to the idea that we're here to blossom, to flower from within. And again, the idea of just bombing the hell out of people and places has very little to do with blossoming. It's the wrong kind of cloud. It's the wrong kind of blossoming. It's the wrong kind of solution for the inevitable ongoing problems of humanity. This one is called Madness Trouble. And so, in a way, you could say we're living in a time of trouble. Another way, you could say we're living in a time of madness. I mean, things are increasingly out of control. And the people who think they're in control, it turns out very quickly after they make these dramatic moves, they're not in control. We're in a time of upheaval, the world turning upside down, hopefully the world transforming into a better version of what we have. But this is Rumi about madness, trouble. You say, I am so small, I can barely be seen in all of this. How can a great love be inside me? Friend, look at your eyes. They are small, and yet they see enormous things. Listen, your love of spying far off satisfactions is what keeps you from tasting the real water of where and who you are now. The real way is who and where you already are. What you search for is sleeping in your very being. And that which sleeps and dreams of sweet water is the taste of the divine in you. The true way is who and where you already are. It's sleeping in your very being. And so to that very being of Coleman Barks, and for all the beautiful poetry and beautiful words, he wrote his own poems. He was a great poet in his own right that he gave everybody for about 88 years. Blessings on him, and I hope he finds. No one knows what's on the other side. There's lots of images about it and ideas about it. So I'm imagining Coleman goes to the other side and he's looking for the way that will lead him to Rumi, who's over there, waiting. Okay, one more poet, but just a line from that poet. And this is the renegade Zen poet EQ, who wrote the line once, listen, you can't help but be who you are and where. And to me, that's significant for this occasion because the idea is how we find ways to change. And the first step in changing is fully acknowledging, recognizing, and being more present with who we are and where. I mean, usually we want to change because there's something missing, and that makes sense. But if we go running off, spying those faraway satisfactions, we don't really get there. We have to begin with who we are and where. And to me, that has in it both meaningful permission. I have to accept myself with the various mistakes I've made, with the various confusions I still have, with the patterns that I know I shouldn't pursue, but they happen anyway, all that kind of thing, the faults and whatever that go along with the gifts of being alive, and even where I am. And when I say that tonight or now, I'm thinking of the people that are in harm's way and can't get out of it. And somehow they have to accept being there, possibly in order to survive, possibly in order to change meaningfully. So, in a sense, we have to begin with permission and with the forgiveness. If we're going to change our lives, if we're going to find ways to have a more meaningful life in an upside down world, we have to get permission from somewhere to give, to make attempts at it. And we have to forgive ourselves for whatever things we feel guilty about and all of that, or else we are dragging corpse down the road while claiming we're changing. So I want to talk about changing a few different ways, but I want to say a little bit more about the context we're in. Um, there's this playing on the edge of war, which is really dangerous right now, and really, I think, deeply unwise. But there we are. But in addition to that, we're in a time of multiple crises and radical changing and an increasing uncertainty about the future of planet Earth. And that creates a weight that no one can simply escape from. It comes down unseen and weighs upon us. And the pressure caused by this cascade of crises that reveal all kinds of existing fault lines in culture also create increasing levels of anxiety that can put us on the edge of overwhelm at any time. Just watch the news for a little too long, and all of a sudden we can be in overwhelm. And any moment, really, when you hear the tragedies that happen and when you hear the disasters happening in nature, which are tragedies of their own, it can lead us to feeling isolated and abandoned in an unreconciled world, even if we live in relatively secure places. What was that old saying? It's the same as to be in a tragic time as to be in a tragic place. We're in a tragic time, and therefore tragedy comes into the places no matter where we are. So we arrive at the place where the maps we have been given do not match the terrain we find ourselves in. The ideas about career don't apply anymore. The ideas about the nature of jobs with the onset of AI don't apply anymore. The idea that we can count on institutions don't apply anymore. The institutions are not up to dealing with the intensity of what's happening in the world. And so we find ourselves in crises and in tragedies that can be seen as a spiritual crisis, in which we have to find a greater, deeper sense of self, or else we can become more subject to increasing feelings of anxiety and abandonment. I'm sorry to be so heavy about this, but I think this is the weight that we're all feeling. And the world is not going to settle soon. So under the idea that we have to be who we are and where, we have to be who we are in this heavy weight of a world that is unsettled and will not settle soon. And so the unity, the wholeness, the coherence that is missing every day in the outside world, We have to find it inside us. We have to fall back on ourselves. I mean, this is well known throughout the course of history and in stories and in myth. And ancient people have gone through this, like in that song, that people know that the world goes wrong. And then we have to find, I mean, the plea in the song is who will take us home. And so one, the psychological answer is we have to find home in ourselves, which in depth psychology would be called the deep self. In mythology, it might be called the deep soul. Similar idea. Um, so the hidden gift, you could say, in a personal, emotional, or spiritual or collective crisis is the potential for a psychological breakthrough that leads to an expansion of our soul. The soul is here to transform and grow. We're not supposed to be similar or the same at the end of life as we were at the beginning. The soul is this dynamic um, energy inside us that intends to transform and grow. And the idea of the nature of the aiming and of the meaning that's in our souls has been lost in the modern world as people have fallen into a collapse of imagination and a kind of indulgence in materialism. In the meantime, life has ways of causing us to face our fears. I think, and according to stories, it's not to stop us or hurt us, but to cause us to grow our souls and get a greater sense of self. And for some, especially like going back a month or so, for some that, and for some at various places in the world right now, that means literally finding ways to stand up, to speak for the truth, for insist on justice. And then for other people, it means finding places of refuge where we can be feel safe enough to find inner coherence. And for some others, it's actually the process of making music, art, and all those things that can demonstrate the constant, uninterrupted flow of expressiveness and creativeness that is natural to the human soul. And so there are these various places, and we have to, in a sense, figure out which is the best place for us now or in a given moment um, to be or try to get to in order to settle in ourselves, since the world won't settle, but also in order to find ways to change, heal, and grow ourselves. And so I just want to go through some things that I think get in the way. Um, so um, there's this funny thing that has happened. When the world outside is so threatening and disturbing, the natural instinct is to turn inside. Like I said, when there's no center out there, when there's no wholeness out there, we look for it inside. But looking inside for a lot of people can be as scary as looking outside. In other words, inside ourselves, we have deep fears and inner conflicts, conflicts that may not have been dealt with ever. And so, in a sense, we're going to face conflict when we turn inward as well. And there's an old idea that suggests that the two greatest fears are the fear of being overwhelmed by the conditions of the world. We all can feel that now. And also the fear of feeling abandoned and being left all alone and isolated in the world that has become less welcoming and less inviting. The fear of overwhelm and the fear of abandonment or isolation. And in a sense, what happens is we have to feel both of them now. Um, we all experience those two things, overwhelm and abandonment early in life. That's my understanding of human psychology. And eventually, the soul would like to heal that. The soul would like to get into those fears and do some healing. And this idea that there's a deep self or deep soul below the fears is a depth psychology idea that's really helpful. In other words, we can go inside and hit the fears and hit the old traumas and the anguishes and all of that stuff. But below that, there is the deep self, the deep soul that actually not only outlives lives through that or is not daunted by that, but also holds the healing energy in the ways that we could change and in changing also heal those early life fears. So Near as I can tell, abandonment is an archetypal condition. So, and I just want to go back to what I said at the beginning. When the war starts up again, and I have this kind of inner traumatic experience because I wound up all alone in a solitary cell of concrete and metal for a long time. And so I was literally abandoned and 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 it at times it was clear that I might just die. And I don't know that anybody was too disturbed about it, but hardly anyone knew about it. And so I can get thrown back into that. It happens when a war starts, but it happens when I need to change as well. And so that's what caused me to study it. And in studying it, I found out that the basic psychology of early life is that each child will have an experience of being abandoned. And it doesn't mean that the mother, for instance, was abusive or cruel. It just means simply that when the child needed to see the eyes of mother or father, and it's often mother, those adoring eyes that looks and say, you know, how you look at the little child and you speak a funny little language, a kind of a charming little language, instinctively, and the child is feeling that as love, as recognition, as acceptance. And just, this is my understanding, at a point when the child wants that, and it's not necessarily that they're being harmed, but simply the mother looks away, or she has another child, or she has a job, or she has to do something with the family or with her husband. It's just that moment. And the reason why I want to describe it that way, it apparently happens to everyone. So everyone winds up with abandonment issues. Everybody winds up with an inner sense that they have been left alone when they needed protection, love, you know, whatever it might be, however it's imagined. And that's inside everyone. And that sense of being abandoned early on gets carried so that the real problem, I think, becomes we tend to abandon ourselves when life gets difficult. We tend to reenact the abandonment that we felt when we're faced with the need to change or the need to deal with a lot of pressure or something super challenging. And now the world has just been high pressure, become high pressured and super challenging all the time. The world itself is trying to transform. And so in the midst of that, and because the pressure is invisible, but it comes down, people are going to feel a greater fear of overwhelm, and there are so many overwhelming issues now, but also a greater fear that they could wind up all alone, unprotected, unnourished, unloved. And so I'm suggesting that we're in a time where the pressure in the world, where the disturbance in the world, where the distortion and conflict in the world is throwing us all back upon our early life traumatic experiences. And one way to see that is people who, you know, we knew them, we watched them, they were on edge, we knew that they weren't quite okay, but they lived on the edge of things. Well, these days they get pushed over the edge and they go over and out. And so either by acting out or by acting in. And so you can see it with a lot of people, but you can feel it in yourself. So the good news about humans in a way is humans are the most adaptable species. Humans appear in all places of the earth practically and figure out how to live with all kinds of climate issues, but all kinds of food sources and things like that. Humans are very adaptive. But the problem is inside early life in the, you know, the dynamic of the family, we have to adapt. The family doesn't know who their child is. And especially the family doesn't know what the child is aimed at. In all of the old traditions, each child is gifted to begin with, but also aimed at something meaningful. But that gets forgotten when the soul comes into the world. And the soul comes into a family which is already living their own cycle of fate and stuff. And so the family doesn't know why the child is there. and the child doesn't know why it's there. And so what happens is this capacity to adapt causes us to over adapt. I'm trying to say we are each and all over adapted to early life circumstances in such a way that helped us survive early on. But later in life, when we need to change, when the idea of transforming, growing, developing needs to happen, and I'm saying in the midst of all the pressure, the response, the natural response is not hiding, it's actually transforming. In those conditions, what happens is we run up against our over adaptation. And one way you could describe the over adapted part of us, it's the ego. The ego has formed in the midst of the early life trauma and it over adapts to the situation. And so, my suggestion, or part of how I'm thinking about the ways we change now, we have to deal with that inner over adaptation. A mythic idea comes to me, and I hope this is helpful. There's an Irish myth in which they say each child coming into the world is one third shaped by the energies of their parents, which nowadays people call DNA. It's one third shaped by an ancestor coming back into the world, and it's one third shaped by a unique spirit that has never been in the world before. This is my latest way of understanding our nature when we come into the world. And so that what's valuable in there is we're only one third the product of our parents, but we over adapt as if we were only the product of our parents. And that takes us in, kind of separates us from this ancestor that is like the wise old woman in stories, or the wise old man, or the sage in the heart, something that knows about life, like with a young person and they say, oh, he or she has an old soul. You can imagine that's the ancestor that came in with them. But really important to me in understanding how the world changes is that third part of a person, which is a spirit that has never been born before. That spirit that is part of our original self and soul that no one knows about, including the person carrying it, is the source of the energy which has the imagination, the creativity, the courage, and the capacity not to change just to change the individual life, but that's going to be the source of what changes the world. And I think the world is trying to not simply change, but transform. I'll come back to that several other ways. So the point of growing up in the old imagination of human life was not to somehow become well adjusted and fit in. That's like ego psychology. The point was to awaken to what is already authentic in us. You hear it in Rumi's poem. The way that we're looking for is sleeping inside us. This stuff may seem, like, I don't know, esoteric. But right now, I think it's the essential information for understanding what's trying to happen in the world. The people that are in charge of the world, and I mean the political systems and now you have so many of these dictator types and autocratic types, trying to take advantage of everybody's fears, really. They can't change the world in a meaningful way. They can disrupt, dramatically alter things, and then it will turn out to be everyone lost. The changes have to come for something deeper, something essential, something that has vertical imagination, that's connected, like the San people would say, to the stars. Something that is trying to awaken inside people. This. I'm just doing kind of a casual version of a lot of mythology. So this deeper sense of self has a much better imagination of the design of the soul. And it knows why each person came here. I'm going to make the argument that each person enters the world gifted and aimed. That's the story of all the traditional cultures. The modern story is each person comes in as a blank soul. And how's that working? And so the problem becomes these capacities are in us. Yet, every time we need them or try to get near them, our original fears of overwhelm, abandonment, and so on get stirred. And because they came so early, sometimes pre-verbally, they don't come with like clear ideas. They come with raw emotions, and they come with, waves of fear. And we think something's really wrong when actually we're getting closer to what is near them or under them or behind them, which is the gifts, the genius, the way that's inside, and the spirit of one's life. Carl Jung, the great depth psychologist, seemingly just out of nowhere said, the gifts hide behind, excuse me, the genius hides behind the wounds. So I'm saying that behind our wounds and even below our wounds, our early life wounds especially, are the very things we're looking for. And the world being upside down and torn apart and polarized has the effect of pushing us down and stirring up those inner fears, which we're calling for the time being fears of overwhelm and fears of abandonment. And that the fact that we are feeling them more doesn't mean something is wrong. It means something has become scary and more immediate, but it means that that is the opportunity to both heal and change. And then I'm adding to that the idea that the collective of humanity, eh, as well as the collective of a community or a nation, it cannot change. Not really. It is the change in the individual level of the soul that actually makes change in the world. And so, just to add this on, we'll come back to some of this other stuff. The old saying is change the soul, change the world. If enough people can go through the awakening experience of bringing into consciousness these qualities inside that can be ancestral, that can be unique spirit, that can be creative, that can be soulful, if enough people do that, then the collective changes. Right now, the collective, besides being polarized, thinks the only way to deal with things is to attack with ridiculously soul destroying as well as earth destroying weapons. So, our early life adaptations, although necessary, um, early on they save our lives, but later on they tend to be how we act automatically, and what saved us early on becomes what can stop our lives and entrap our lives later on. I'm saying that we are here not just to transform, but to heal those early life wounds and transform from that wounded place into a place of wholeness that is there also, but underneath the pain, the trauma, the fears. Um, so in this kind of imagination, um, if you want to keep it in the psychological realm, you have the ego or the little self, which is formed to never feel those original fears again. That's the job of the ego, is to keep us from feeling how really afraid we are and how abandoned we can feel. And then the deeper self, which doesn't feel those fears, but actually has inner medicines and capacities to help heal those fears. And the problem is the ego doesn't recognize the deep self. The ego is a little self that thinks it's the deep self or the big self, but it's not. Check out the ego. Check out the ego of the people creating all the bombs and all the weapons and how they act and how they see the world. Many, if not most of them, are empty inside. That's what I see psychologically. And so the ego is the pretender to the throne of the nobility of the self. And so there's an old saying that anxiety can be understood as the distance between the ego or little self and the deep self and soul. Anxiety is created between that separation, and the pressure in the world now comes down on the dynamic of ego and soul and pushes them further apart, just the way the things in the outside world are polarizing. And that brings up the deep emotions and traumatic things that we haven't been able to deal with. And so the only solution to what's happening in the outside world has to be found inside, but inside we have to deal with conflicts and patterns and issues that have been there all along as well. So I want to say this other thing too, which I find in mythology. I find mythology to be really practical, because the basic idea in mythology is not that the world began at a certain time and then it's going to come to an end. That's a historical idea. Mythology says the world began in a time that cannot be named, in the primordial time where the source of life was. And then over time, the world comes to the end of a cycle, at which time it kind of collapses or constricts. And then something has to go back to the source again. And from that comes the next version of the world. And so in mythology, the world can't come to an end. But people can live in a long, dark period. In India, they call it the Kali Yuga, for a very long time. If people cannot refine the connection to the source of life, which you could imagine mythologically as one place, but also the source of their life, the inner spirit, the inner genius that each person brought to life. The way we're looking for is sleeping inside us. And the way that the world needs now is many people awakening to the way that's inside them, because each person that finds the inner sense of self and soul in a deeper way finds out that they are aimed at something, that they are called to do something. And then if enough people are doing that, then the world starts to change, not because everybody agreed and everybody had a big meeting and they decided they'd never fight again. That's not going to happen. But because many people begin to do things that are healing, that are meaningful, and then the soul grows. You know, the modern world has such collapsed ideas about the what we're living in. All ancient cultures had the idea of the soul of the world, that the world is a soul, it's a living thing, and we are kind of tied to the core and the center of it. In the case of the San people in South Africa, it was not just that each soul was tied to the star, but each soul was tied also to the center of the cosmos. And we are really capable of bringing radical forms of creative energy into life through ourselves. But in trying to do that, it's inevitable that we activate the inner traumas, which for this session we're calling the fear of overwhelm and the fear of abandonment. Um, so I want to say something about the resistance to change. I mean, everybody's trying to change all the time. The entire kind of world of advertising is really about change. Get something new, get a new car. You already have a car that's working pretty well. Why do you need a new car? Because change is so magic to people. And people are always trying to change their body. Most people are trying to get someone else's body without even finding out the nature of their own body. But no matter how much people want to change, we have a resistance to change. In the study of caterpillars turning into butterflies, which I've been studying, they found out that the cells of the caterpillar, which are distinct and different from the cells of the butterfly, the cells of the caterpillar resist the presence and the awakening of the butterfly cells. And the butterfly cells, interestingly enough, are called, they're called, no, what are they called? I'm sorry. What? They're called imaginal cells. This is what the scientists name them, as if to say they understand that at the center of change is imagination. But also in the center of trying to change, there is resistance to change. And if we want to use the caterpillar butterfly metaphor, which is the best one known on Earth, the caterpillar has to die, and the resistance of the caterpillar has to die for the butterfly to grow and be born. And so I'm trying to say our resistance to change makes sense. It's part of the deal. And also, it's connected to our original early life fears and wounds when we could not project ourselves and we had to adapt. But once we're grown, it's as if we could maybe start to figure out, even though I feel those fears, I don't have to be reduced to a childlike or childish condition. I can go, yeah, I'm not, as dependent or as unable now. I can tolerate the fears that I'm feeling. So the word fear is really interesting. It comes from the English root fare, as in thoroughfare. And the deep meaning of fear is not something that makes you tremble. what they used to say, fear is where you're going. They used to say, fear is the teacher. In other words, the way we're looking for, the aim we're looking for, the sense of self we're looking for, according to the poets as well as the mystics and the mythologists, is inside us. But going near us stirs fears, and the fears aren't to say don't go. They're evidence we're going in the right way. So fear can be reimagined. Most emotions can, by the way. So here's another little story. This is from ancient India. And it's also like the butterfly and the caterpillar about our resistance to change. So hunters in ancient India had a proven method for catching monkeys. They wanted to catch monkeys. And so they would take a coconut cut in half and hollow it out and take a half of it and then make a hole in it and just large enough to let a monkey's hands pass through it. And then the coconut would be put together, pinned to the ground, and inside would be some tempting aromatic food that the monkey would want inside the hollow, partly buried shell. Inevitably, a monkey approaches with the idea of grabbing the food inside the shell, and as soon as the hand has grasped the food inside the trap, the fist holding the food has now become too large to come back out through the hole. So in order to become free from the trap, all the monkey has to do is let go of the thing that it grabbed, let go of the food that it thinks it has to have, and it can get the hand out and go away. And yet the monkeys never do that. Freedom is nearby, literally within their grasp. However, almost all of the monkeys stay caught. They stay imprisoned by their hunger, by their sense that they have to have that, and a fierce unwillingness to let go. And the result is that they become trapped and become taken by the hunters. So I'm saying our ego is like that monkey, that it has itself attached to things that we think that's who I am. And also because early we had to attach things in order to survive our early life. And then the idea is I'm not going to let go. And because we can't let go, we can't fully change. We can't transform. And so I want to add more about this letting go. Letting go is connected to the idea that, like with the caterpillar and the butterfly, the caterpillar has to die. In that story, it just decomposes to allow the butterfly imaginal cells to grow. And so that's very dramatic. But in every change, situation of major change, something has to be let go. It's true for each one of us at each stage or each meaningful crossroads in life, but it's also true for the collective society. There's no way for modern cultures to move on and find a greater imagination, a greater vision, a more humane way of dealing with life, a better ways to connect to nature without letting go of everything we're holding on to, which becomes most aspects of civilization and all kinds of things. And yet, according to mythology, according to the kind of dynamic of transformation, the the society that won't let go becomes caterpillar-like, limited, and begins to die at a certain level, while nearby is this butterfly that represents the capacity for rebirth and renewal, and also goes from being where the caterpillar is stuck on the ground or on one branch, the butterfly is free to fly to the gardens and the flowers and all. And it's not an accidental metaphor. We all, it's interesting too. In English, a lot of English comes from ancient Greece, Greek language, and in Greek, the word for butterfly is psyche. Psyche. So psyche means two things, butterfly and soul. And so for our soul to grow, butterfly-like, to expand, to lift and lift us, we have to let go of those things that have been restricting us all along. And I'm saying the ideal time to do that, and maybe the most important time to do that, is when everything else is conflicted, polarized, and caught in spirals of destruction. So I want to add another image there, which is just another way of going at it, which to say that another way to understand what we're living with and living in that affects our ideas and our imagination of finding ways to change, but really ways to transform, is the old idea of rites of passage. So the caterpillar turning into the butterfly is kind of going through a rites of passage where it stops living, it goes into a cocoon, and then no one sees what actually happens. But when it comes out, it's a different being. That's the same process of rites of passage. The first step is stopping and separating from everything. The second step is descending or entering an kind of an disoriented place, a betwixt and between, often called liminality. And then in that not knowing, necessarily letting go stage, something new awakens in the soul of the initiate, and then the person comes out of the descent, the cocoon, out of the uncertainty, comes out as a new person. I'm saying, in a sense, we are in the midst of a collective rite of passage, that the world itself is trying to transform, that in order for nature to get healed and get balanced again, transformation is needed, not just certain policies. There has to be a transformation because there's so many levels that already have been damaged. And because humans have been part of a lot of that damage, the transformation has to happen to humanity as well. That we're in an unusual period. The world has gone through all kinds of transformations. It's gone through periods of collapse and renewal. But I think it's probably rare to be alive at a time when nature is unraveling and culture is collapsing at the same time. And the message is not simply, oh my God, this is going to be the end and there's something that's so wrong that it can't be fixed. I think the message, according to mythology and even in the message of the psyche and the soul, the message is that we're in the middle of this process of letting go, transforming, awakening, and then coming into a new vision and understanding of the world, which then allows us to help heal those very things that we have damaged in terms of the earth and nature and in terms of the distortions of human culture. So I'm trying to say this idea of finding ways to change is not simply personal, and yet the power of it, the essence of it actually happens in the individual soul. So I'm saying that I'm going to just repeat the old idea, change the soul, change the world. So in a sense, well, two things I just want to repeat. That's central to the nature of transformation, and it's there in the story of the caterpillar and the butterfly, is that imagination, not reason, not agreements, not willpower, remains the core tool and the core power for making meaningful changes. And then going back to the sand people with the soul, the heart of the person connected to a star, um, uh, the, um, the sense of this power of imagination in a person, usually considered to be in the heart, is also the spark of the divine in a person. And that spark has the power of imagination and vision. And even though the world has become dark and most predictions are fatalistic, it's in that darkness, like the cocoon of the caterpillar, that a new vision is born. And no one sees it until it manifests. No one, I mean, nowadays the biologists can go in there and see what's going on, but up until recent times, no one saw the transformation that was so profound, even though it was happening all the time. And so, in case it's not clear, I just want to refer to the old idea of the core mystery of life. In a sense, you could say life is a mystery that's trying to be solved. It's a mystery that wants to be solved. And at the core of the mystery, according to all the old stories, at the core of the mystery is life, death, rebirth. life, death, renewal. And that we are in that process as a collective rite of passage, you could call it, and as being under the pressure to transform our lives in order to deepen, expand, and make our lives more meaningful and purposeful. But also, in doing that, we contribute to the transformation of the world, which is trying to happen. Um, so, and although deeply disorienting and disconcerting, this betwixt and between place that we're in, which people used to call the liminal phase, it can also be seen as the proper place where renewed potentials and possibilities become more conscious again. And so, if we can avoid the traps of fear and despair, we find ourselves close to the imagination of potentials and possibilities that we had not recognized or seen. That's why I'm saying it can't happen through committee meetings and all. And some of those are good. But what's happening now, we see it because we all see the bombs drop. We all see the avalanche fall. We all see the flooding. We see the size of the storms. We all see all kinds of wreckage going on. We now can see it because of technology. Most people couldn't see all that happening at once. We now see it. And I think it becomes really important to understand it, not as simply devastation on the way to the end, but as collapse on the way to renewal. Another old saying, as collective fears and anxiety grow, a balancing imagination and an energy for healing tries to awaken in each soul. Okay, so I've just been carrying on there a bit, and I see there are questions. I'll go to the questions. Excuse me. What's the proper balance between surrender and action? I am sensitive and can't help but be aware of a lot of hatred and division within activist movements, but my partner is passionate about protest. Yeah, there we are, right? I mean, and of course, there's the differences in people often is the source of their attraction and the dynamic for a lot of love. But yeah, people need different things. Um, and so I'm a big fan of surrender if it's surrender to the right thing. And back in the 60s, when I got out of my experience in prison, I was an activist. I was out in the street protesting against war and against, for civil rights and for women's rights and all that kind of thing, because I realized there was a chance for things to change. And some of it did, and definitely people learned things. But not everybody is aimed that way. And I think there has to be the acceptance that the way that's inside some people can be more about reflection and finding refuge rather than standing out and facing the heavy stuff. And so it seems like a conversation has to happen there. And I don't think it's necessarily that either partner is wrong. On the other hand, I do think that we all have to recognize that in the amount of hatred and division in the world, we can see parts of our own inner division. I don't know why I have to say that, but I think the outer and the inner do reflect each other. Anyway, good luck with that, and certainly both things are needed. I found out recently there is no way to get better from the infirmity I have, and I've had it for the past 5 years, and my health continues to worsen. How do I live with this knowledge and increasing disability? Well, I'm really sorry. I mean, my heart sinks. Like, that's a very hard road. That's a hard fate. And especially having the knowledge that it's going to continue to worsen. And so I don't know for sure how you live with it. And but where my mind goes, but also my imagination goes, for the time that's left, and for the length of time that various capacities and abilities are left, to be doing something creative. And I think the soul knows what will work for it. And I was thinking of the French painter, I'm forgetting his name right now, but he was a great painter and then he went blind. And, that's a rough on a painter. And then he kept painting. He learned to paint without seeing what he was painting. And so I think there's stuff in the soul that goes beyond the descriptions we've been given and the limitations we've been told about. And I feel very sorry for that heavy fate that you have. And then I wonder what the soul would like to do with the creative energy as long as it lasts. It could be music, it could be anything. And it's not done for performance. It's done for being part of the song of life, for adding a harmony to the troubles of the world, that kind of thing. I'm sorry to hear about it. I wish you the best. Yeah. How can mothers become guides for their children during a time of great change? Really good question. Anyone who's a parent now has to be looking at the world and saying, what do we tell our children? What do we do? And so I'm going to say two things. One thing, um, when my children became grown, they came back and almost all of them said something like, well, there's all these things you didn't do that we needed, Dad. And that was really hard to deal with and all. But it was impressive each time you became more like yourself. In other words, the children are really watching. The young people are too. And so I know in the Western society, a woman's life after motherhood, there's not a place for it really. You know what I mean? We don't have the idea of the wise old woman, and we don't have the idea that a woman keeps being not just a womb-bearing children, but a womb-bearing imagination and a womb-bearing love and all that kind of thing. We've lost all that in this collapse into the literal and the material. Um, but so a mother can be a guide by living her life in meaningful ways because children, especially, but young people too, are way more impressed by what we do that looks meaningful than what we tell them they should do. There's that. Um, and then the other thing, I'm going to add two more things. The other thing is that mother or father, as the child is getting to adolescence and youth, they're supposed to leave mother in part of the rites of passage, understood not as something that we have to reinvent and introduce into schools, but understood as something we're already in, that we're in this dynamic that it actually is a reflection of the world's capacity to transform, that indigenous people figured out how to imitate. That in that dynamic, the child at the not early on, but at adolescence or early youth, girl or boy, they are moved from the lap of their personal mother to the lap of Mother Earth or Mother Nature. It's called a second mother. There's a second birth that's required for a person to go from a child into a whole person. It's not understood anymore, but it's necessary. And it included moving from the complexities of being with personal mother to the dynamics of being connected on a seriously soulful level and spiritual level with Mother Earth and Mother Nature. They distinguish between Mother Earth and Mother Nature. Modern people don't. But Earth is stable and solid and nourishing and supportive, and Mother Nature is constantly changing and transforming and showing how that works. They're two different energies. But a child would not remain simply connected to the personal mother, and that had the benefit for both child and mother, that after the children have gone far enough, they're getting ready to get out of childhood, the mother goes back to a life of meaning, back to whatever is her calling in life. And the children go on to their calling in life. That's an interesting idea. Anyway, um, yeah. And then I'll add the other thing. And I'm going from children here to older children. Whereas the idea used to be you grow up and if you're fortunate enough to have getting education and stuff, you then like go to higher education or college or something, and you pick a career and you live your life in that field. That's over. It's over because of AI, but it's also was already over because now the world is changing so fast that they say the average young person entering, the marketplace is going to have 5, 6, or 7 careers during their life. So one of the things in this time of change is to help the children and the young people learn more about the capacity to deal with change. And the only way we can do that is to manifest it ourselves. So good luck with that. How do we know if a calling requires us to be seen in public, that requires us to be seen in public, is actually coming from our soul, or is instead coming from the ego as a trauma response for not being recognized enough during childhood? Good question. Is it a calling, or is it my ego trying to desperately, be seen or be elevated to some point place of adoration? Um, I don't know. I mean, for me, the sense of calling comes from such a deep place. So let me first say that. We think of the calling as being outside, and in a way it is outside, but the calling is calling to what's in the soul. So a genuine calling is a call to the genius that we're carrying from within. And so I don't know the details and the circumstances, but I would try that being in public. I would try that being out and acting as if it's a calling, and then see if it's enlivening, see if it has more than just egotism involved. I think it has to be tried. And I think there is the danger. You have all kinds of people now doing things without having a calling. Most of the people in charge are not the kind of people that should be in charge. They're just egotists. They're opportunists. They're just taking over the kind of distortion in the culture and taking opportunities for not necessarily wholesome or good purposes. But here's the thing that I've found. In the midst of radical change, there is an acceleration of calling because the things outside are not working well. It's very confusing, but it creates more room for the calling to be heard. I know there are distractions, but the old idea is there can be an acceleration of calling. And maybe what I'm saying, because I don't know you, is that you might have to try it to find out. I mean, it's not that hard to recognize, oh, I'm on an ego trip. Or if you have friends, they'll help you. They'll inform you because they know what your ego is like. I think it's worth a try. Find out. Thank you. Is the abandonment you speak of unique to Western civilization, or has it occurred in the East, in Africa, and in tribal cultures as well? The answer is yes. Yes, I've worked with tribal African people. And again, remember, they have a different way of seeing it. That first of all, in many traditional cultures, it wouldn't be a nuclear family. It would be an extended family. So here comes whoever it is, you know, this child. And it can actually happen that, let's say, the mother and the child do not kind of vibe together very well. And the mother may nurture the child and all, but there's not a lot of resonance there. Well, usually what happens is the child wanders over to the aunt's house nearby because the aunt vibes or connects to the sense of the child, and the child gets the kind of psychological mothering from an aunt. I hope I'm making sense. And then all those cultures had the idea that secretly we're all connected to Mother Nature. And so it was never simply the abandonment of the individual child in the dynamic with the and the complexity of the personal mother. We have exaggerated that by being disconnected, by having nuclear families, which have, the title tells you is potentially explosive, um, but also because we have created this kind of fantasy that human nature is separated from nature, and that we have this subject-object thing that has become like a belief system. Um, and it makes outside things into objects, and it makes inside things into a limited sense of subject. And so the abandonment things are real. But if I go back to the rites of passage, often what happens is, let's take the daughter, the young daughter. Now, classically, the girls go into initiation when they have their menses. They go in individually. The boys don't have menses. They kind of have mental menses, but you can't see them. And so the boys go when a group is ready. So the boys go as a group, and inside that dynamic with the group, they awaken to who they are as an individual. That's what's supposed to happen. That's what's supposed to happen with sports teams, and that's what's supposed to happen in protests. Is you join the collective to be part of something meaningful, calling for change, and in the midst of it, it's not just that you find the right people to agree with, you find your own bit of awakening. But anyway, the girl would be taken from family, and in cultures like in Africa, parts of Africa, she would be put in a hollow tree. That would be the same tree that all of the women in the tribe had gone through their rites of passage in a hollow tree. And while she's in the tree, she can't move very well because it's a hollow, narrow tree, but she's fed by the women of the tribe, not her mother. She separates from the mother and she's in there, and the women of the tribe feed her literally as if she was like a fetus. They're repeating the original birth, but it's the second birth. And what makes it a second birth, first of all, it's the women of the tribe. But second of all, they're also feeding her the mythology and the philosophy of the culture, which in this case, because she's a girl, would be an intense understanding of the nature of the feminine, of the capacity that was used to be known as lunar knowledge in the body. And so when she comes out of that, she comes out as a grown person, and then she's celebrated as one of the women. It's more complicated than I said, but there's the basic idea. So our sense of abandonment is exaggerated because we're also dissociated from the larger sense of family and from the sense of human nature being connected to great nature. How do we practically open the inner eyes of the heart in order to see the world not as a series of disasters, but a place where our specific purpose is actually called for? What is the first step for shifting from being a victim of global change to being a participant in it? That means a participant in global change. Thank you. It's a good way to put it. So I do refer to it a lot as opening the inner eyes of the heart or the inner eyes of the soul. And I got it two ways. I'm 20 years old when I'm in that solitary cell. And I'm talking about that part because war is going on again and it's activated in me. And I'm separated from everybody and no one knows where I am. I'm hidden for all kinds of reasons. And no one knows where I am. My family has no idea where I am. And I don't see anybody but the occasional guard. And and I had, when I first got there, I had like a notebook that I found in the rec room and some colored pencils. And I actually started drawing, which is not something I hardly ever do. And I drew mandala images instinctively. Later, when I was studying Carl Jung, he found that people in prison, people in insane asylums even, will draw mandalas. The mandala is a representation of the deep sense of self and soul, the wholeness hidden within us. And so, in a sense, something opened inside me that I started to see mandalas. Like, I wasn't asleep, but I would get these visions and I would draw them. And then the other thing that happened to me is I was revisited by characters in mythology that I had learned from studying it before when I was younger. And that was like an opening of an inner imagination that had its own way of seeing life. And that brought me to one of these places of fear, even paranoia, on the edge of fear and on the edge of awakening. And one day I just had the realization I'm either losing my mind or I'm finding my mind. And I had no one to talk to. And I just decided if I lose my mind, there's not much going to come out of that. So I'm going to decide I'm finding my mind and that my mind is about these kind of images and figures and stories. And my whole life has been about that. It's all about mythology. It's all about stories. It's all about imagination. And so what I'm saying is if we want to find where our inner eyes might have opened, even for just a short period of time, go to the places where we were most isolated, most wounded. Carl Jung again, genius, the gifts hide behind the wound. So since we don't have rites of passage, and we're not going to have them soon, I'm not arguing for that. I'm arguing for understand the nature and dynamic of a rite of passage, which means separation from everything we knew, getting caught, lost, disoriented in the in-between, not knowing and needing to let go, and then finding a new vision which renews our spirit but also renews the community. We're in that. And we just call it, whatever, modern warfare and all those kind of things. But at the level of the soul, we're in that. And so just as we now have to find in ourselves that inner capacity to awaken and see with different eyes, because the world's going to continue to be disturbed. But in the midst of it, the flowers still grow, the stars still sparkle, and that kind of thing. We can keep our connection to the world of imagination and vision. But we have to usually go near our own woundedness and our own fears in order to find. There's an old saying that anybody by the time they're 20 years old or so has had an experience that opened them to the wonder of the world, seen their own way. It's just that most people have forgotten it, or they thought they could get it again the next time from some kind of a substance, and so they got addicted to something to try and find that. Or they were told they was wrong, they were crazy, and they shouldn't have it. According to the old stories, everybody has that experience. We just don't often know what to do with it. Thanks for the questions. I'm going to go to another part of this. And, you know, there's a way in which it's hard to say, well, how do we find ways to change and what do we do? And especially once we agree that, wow, this has gotten to be harder and harder and heavier and more uncertainty. Uncertainty is a really big fear. You can see how it works in the stock market. It works in the inner market of the soul too. Finding ways to change and then sustaining the change seems to me requires practices. So I think I want to take like an overview of practice and suggest that to be on a meaningful path in life, we have to find practices that sustain our attention, our capacity to stay vital, and our ability to keep seeing with new eyes. William Blake, who was a great visionary, once wrote, "Everything worth doing and being done well has art in it, whether it's whether it's conversation, education, cuisine, or love." And what he's saying is whatever it is that we're attracted to or compelled by can become a practice. So just as an overall idea. So amidst the flood of changes and the threats of fatalism and all that kind of stuff, a genuine art or practice helps us to keep the fears, the doubts, and the existential dread at bay. If a person can get to that thing which feels like a meaningful practice to them, and everybody has that kind of built in because everybody has genius, and the genius is naturally attracted to certain kinds of practice. And if a person can find that, then there's a place to turn to, there's a place to go to get the rhythm back and to get the reconnection to the depth of the soul, which is the only place now where we're going to find coherence and wholeness. A practice helps bring the glowing shape of our dream of life into view. Another way of looking at it, that it's not practical only, it's also about finding these eyes of the soul and seeing the glowing shape of the dream of our life. Through a meaningful practice, we gain an emotional seating in an inner refuge that we can continually return to. So just as an example, for me, mythology and stories. You know, every morning I get up and I'm either working on a dream or I'm working on another story or a mythic image. And that's been going on for a long time. And for me, that could be anywhere from 3 to 5 hours in the morning. And so I have this refuge. And yes, I follow the news. I feel like I have to. I have to be a witness to this collapse in order to be kind of a valid agent of change. But I have this time in the morning where I'm not looking at all that. I'm engaging in what is meaningful practice for me. My understanding is that through a creative practice, we find ways to express our true selves, to be in touch with our deep self and soul, and then it has to be expressed in order to be part of the world or in order to be proven through the dynamic of manifestation. And in a sense, the soul's aim has always been, this goes back to Blake maybe, the soul's aim has always been to practice becoming who we already are at our core. So my understanding is, like young people now are told that they have to become someone. It's all very, very sad what's happening to young people. But they're told that they have to become someone. Well, the real thing to tell them is they already are someone. They are someone at their core. They are a unique being. That's the understanding of all the old traditions. And so we have young people thinking that they have to go outside looking for who they might become and not finding who they already are, which would have been the core practice of a rite of passage. A good thing about a practice is it works whether we're at the heights or in the depths. So for years, and still at times, but for years, another practice of mine was hand drumming. And I would just do it like if I was high, in the excitement of life, there's certain rhythms I could play. And I could have my whole body participate in that. And if I was down in the depths, I could go to a different kind of rhythm and I could just make rhythm out of that downheartedness or out of that depression even. And so for me, that was a practice that really worked and still does at times. And I love that, to be honest. And so it's also legitimate, I think, to say practice is loving something enough to be with it, to be in it again and again in all the moods of our soul. A practice allows us to do that. Like if I'm working on myths and images, I don't have to be in a good mood. I can be in any kind of mood at all. I'm welcome in that space, and there's something I can work with. The mood can become an expression. Having a practice is like entering the unknown repeatedly and learning to swim in the inner sea of oneself. Um, just another image. Um, Okay. Practice refers to the variety of ways that we use to find the ground on which we can struggle with the essential inner divisions and fears and with the conflicts that we have inside in order that we can continue to find and be in touch with a deeper sense of unity. I'm saying that a practice should bring a person into contact with what we were talking about earlier in terms of the core inner fears and the core inner conflicts. That a meaningful practice will get us down into that, but it gives us a way of staying there and being there, and it diminishes the fear of it because it's held within a practice. So a practice, the way I'm talking about it, is different from a skill. I'm saying that in reference to the drumming. There's a lot of skill in drumming. You can learn about the skill. There's skill in painting. There's skill in breathing. And you can be learning about that, but that's not the practice. The practice is dwelling in the depth of it and using the skill to find deeper and deeper ways of being present. And I would say to find deeper and deeper revelations of the deep self and soul. Also, you could say we can learn skills without changing our character. A practice will change a person's character. Uh, a genuine practice combines repeatedly feeling the depths of uncertainty with finding intimations of something meaningful and enduring. In other words, a real practice, again, it's not going to be just developing the skill. That's only part of it. It's going to be being able to go into the depths of uncertainty and find intimations of things that are important and meaningful and enduring. So through practice, we become established in ourselves. We gain an emotional seating, a place to dwell, a refuge we can return to again and again. And I'm saying when the world is falling apart and there seems to be, nothing but one bad story after another, a practice allows us to take some of that in and then go find a connection to our deep self again. And in some cases that can lead to creative stuff. I will take a certain amount of the news in and I will write it out and then find things in it that are more creative expressions than what was being said on the news. So a practice is an essential work that never can be completed. That's another thing about practice. It's not like you get so good and now it's over. A meaningful practice is never over. It can't be completed. It's beyond ourselves, and it's taken us beyond ourselves. Um, so um, a practice is also a way to gain an inner sense of authority and, and an increased capacity for agency. To me, a meaningful practice will give a place to sit and feel inner authority. You know, one of the problems in the world right now is people give outer authority to those who have no idea how to deal with it, but don't know that we all have inner authority that is waiting to be found inside of ourselves. And a meaningful practice should give us a greater capacity for agency in the world. Going back to ancient India, the basic division was made between what they called the nay and the yea of life, the no and the yes. And the path of the nay involved, and does involve to this day, those practices that remove a person from the commotion of the common world. On that path, a person says no to this and no to that. That's why it's called the nay path, as they try to find a path to the still center of the place. So that's the kind of inward practice. And it seems odd in the modern world, but it's called the nay. It's called negative because it's saying no to involvement in the world. No, no, going to the still center within. And the path of yea goes the opposite way as the seeker says yes to whatever appears and bows before it. It's the devotional path, the way of the creative and the ecstatic, the way of all those who produce art, music, and all of the outer elaborations of the inner creativity of life. Those are considered to be the two big paths. And there's nuances, but so one, the inward path of contemplation, meditation, and deep reflection, and the other, the expressive outward going path of creative arts, music, dance, painting, writing. Contemplative practice turn away from the world, looking inwards to find that center of peace and stillness. And creative practices go out into the world, looking to affect the world by being creative, bringing creative energy to it. Whereas yoga and meditation, for instance, enact a withdrawal from entanglements in the daily world. You have to do that. The creative arts offer ways to engage the world and participate in creation ongoing. So I'm using the old mythological idea. Creation wasn't something that happened back there, and now it looks like we're on the way to the end of it. Creation is ongoing all the time, just as breathing is ongoing all the time, just as forests are ongoing. And so the creative expressive arts are trying to connect to that energy of creative creation that's always ongoing. Whereas yoga and meditation are trying to withdraw from that in order to find that inner path to stillness, and a sense of a deep central sense of self and connection. In a sense, they used to be called, both of them are called trances. One is the inner trance, the other is the dance trance. And so some people follow one path to the exclusion of the other, and yet everyone must experience some of the yay and the nay to some degree. And so some people go on both paths. And in these transformative times, a person might need to do both. There might be a greater sense of I need to get quiet and settle and find that inner place of quiet and centeredness and refuge. I need that to offset the commotion in the outer world. And then again, I might need to be creative to get all the energy that's being stirred up, the emotions stirred up by the outer world, into some form that is not just agitation and anxiety, but actually is an expression that's creative. Originally, the arts were devotional expressions connected to the sacred. The arts weren't about, you know, what do they call it now? I don't know, a field of, a commercial field. The idea of a music industry is like a backwards idea. The idea was that the arts are ways of bringing the divine into the world by articulating the creativity of one's own soul. You know, to me, it's obvious that, like every generation, and maybe sooner than that, people have to rewrite all the love songs. By now, there's been so many love songs, you think it would be over. No, it has to be remade, redone for the times in which we live. And the same with all the arts. So it's not art for art's sake. It's creative work in service of the divine and the community of souls. And so those are the two, directions of practice. And I'm suggesting that in order to survive, but more importantly, in order to be coherent and to be able to transform and change in the midst of all that's going on, we probably need a practice or more than one practice. And I want to restate, it's not that certain people have creativity in a practice and certain people have a capacity for meditation and others are just lost. That's not how it is. Each person comes into the world with genius and with an aim that's trying to work from within. And for some people, the style that's natural to them will take them more to the meditative path, while others are going to go more to the creative path. And then some are going to go back and forth. And so it also becomes important to know in the course of life, the practices that we need can change. Like I said, for many years, drumming and using rhythm music and songs with rhythm was really a daily practice for me and an important one for kind of being in rhythm and being in touch with myself and feeling part of the dynamic of life. And now it's still wonderful and I'll do it sometimes, but now this whole idea of creating creative writing and taking images and turning it into sentences and trying to, shape a kind of a poetic approach to mythology has become more of a dominant thing for me. And so I'm suggesting that in the course of time, the practices that we need can change and there's no rules. Even though nowadays they're often taught with rules, there's no rules. It's the engagement of the individual soul with the dynamic sources of life. All right. Also important to say that the point of a practice, or I'm against the old idea that practice makes perfect. I think it's a very diminishing idea. Practice makes practice. First of all, the word perfect comes from the Latin perfectere, and it means to be through the form. Perfection is death. That's how it was understood. And so this idea now of becoming perfect is a misunderstanding that gets put there in place of the idea that there's something unique, a unique spirit that's trying to become conscious in us. And since people don't think they have the unique spirit, they think they should become perfect. And becoming perfect is the last thing someone should do, but also you can't do it. And so the idea that practice makes perfect is ignorant. Practice, a real practice makes practice. And in practice, it's clarity and meaning that's trying to be found, not perfection. So perfectionism is kind of a pretension of the little self that is necessarily at odds with the deeper sense of self and soul. I just say that because I know a lot of people struggle with perfectionism, and it's kind of a modern exaggeration that comes from a loss of the sense that what we're looking for is already inside. And then for a person to be, so imagine the idea is to be whole, not perfect. And to be whole includes our holes. In other words, to be whole is to have gifts and wounds and be conscious of both. And perfection is a impossible aim that's a substitute for being one's genuine self. Um, so practice is the ground on which we struggle with the essential faults and conflicts in our life in order to find a deeper sense of unity and wholeness. And so again, the classic thing is one direction is meditation and inner practice, and the other is creative expression and bringing things into the world that weren't there. And they both have tremendous value, and people can do both or learn both. All right. So I think Before going back to questions, I should bring in this one other thing that has to do with changing right now and transforming. Because the world is changing so much, and what happens is the archetypes that are behind the world are also shifting. And so when everything outside is falling apart, it's often what happens is the archetype of wholeness is awakening. And in other words, in a certain way, there is a balance, just the way night turns into day, turns into night, and that kind of thing. When the brokenness is profound in one area, the wholeness is trying to be found in a different one. And so here we are in this time of the collapse but potential transformation of the world. And there's broken things all the time. There's broken moments, there's broken hearts. It's a really tough time to be alive. And it's a time where we worry about ourselves and about others. But at the same time, the way the setup works is certain archetypes will rise closer to consciousness. And archetypes, there's lots of archetypes. And arche means ancient, and type is like from Greek typos, and it means form. The archetypes are ancient forms that carry energy and imagination. And so in the times of collapse, what happens is the archetype of the deep self, which is the archetype of wholeness and unity, starts to try to get our attention. It starts to enter the world. So we're not actually alone. I mean, humans have never been alone. We've always been kind of the middle. I call humans the missing link or looking for a missing link. In other words, in biology, they're looking for a missing link. Humans are the missing link. Um, in old terms, understanding the human is we're stretched between the heavens and the depths of the earth. We have in our bodies literally a vestigial tail that connects us to the animal world, while our imagination is connected to the stars. That's us. We're stretched. We're in the middle, not because we're the most important, but we're this kind of complex chain, link in the chain of being that is capable of consciousness, awareness, creativity, and meaningful change. And so, and the source of that has always been considered the individual self or the individual soul. I use both terms. And so the archetype of the deep self and soul is actually closer to us when everything's falling apart. That's the old understanding. And the archetype is not just something that appears in dreams. It's actually a vehicle of existence that has energy and specific capacities. And so it can empower us. Archetypes have potentials that can initiate behaviors that are critical at a given time in life. Classic example is the mother archetype. It's one of the ones that people think about all the time. But one example I heard was a young man walking down the street by himself, quiet, and he hears what sounds like an infant crying, and he looks around, there's no one around. Then he sees one of those little carriers for an infant, and sure enough, there's an infant in there crying, and there's no evidence of a mother or parent or any adult around, and he stands there in the middle of the street not knowing what to do, and then instinct kicks in, or you could say the archetype of the mother kicks in, and although he's never been a mother and he can't even become one, he's a young man, he goes over there and instinctively picks up that baby and begins to rock it and begins the next thing to think, oh, this baby probably needs food. I have to go find food. And the next thing, he's actually acting and he's been imbued with the mother archetype. So the archetypes have aim, they have specific energies, they have certain dynamics. And I'm suggesting that in this falling apart world, and I'm not the first one to bring this up, but the archetype of the deep self and soul is activated. And so, like the old stories where they say, you don't have to go all the way down the road to reach the divine, because the divine is coming down the road to meet you. And the archetypes are a form of the divine. And so we don't have to solve this all ourselves. We could actually find, if we can let go of the things we're afraid of and the limitations that we think define our identity, if we can let go of that, we can become vehicles through which the archetype of the deep self and the sense of wholeness can manifest. Um, and then you can see how that can happen in practices. And then the other one I mentioned, because it's connected to the practices as well, is the archetype of the creative or creativity. The world's fallen apart, but the process of the world is birth, death, and rebirth, or birth, death, and renewal. And so it's not as if the collapse happens and then the renewal happens. It happens at the same time. While everything is collapsing, certain things are trying to arise and bring a renewal of life. And so there is a greater capacity, it seems, for creativity that's present because the archetype of the creative comes back into the world with renewed strength because the world that we used to have is already disappearing and mostly gone. And then that emptiness doesn't persist, it gets filled by creation coming back in. Can't prove that, but that's what's in the myths. By the way, that's the meaning of apocalypse. Doesn't mean fiery end of the world. Apocalypse means collapse, renewal. And so the sense of the creative is actually closer. And there are ways of being creative that have to do with nature, that have to do with medicine, that have to do with with all kinds of arts that that really can be enhanced more because the archetype itself is coming present because of the collapse of institutions, patterns, and structures that used to be holding the world together. It doesn't collapse into anarchy, it collapses into some disorientation, and then that leads to vision, imagination, an increase of creative energy. And going back to what I said earlier, change the soul, change the world. So they're big ideas. I can't prove most of them. I'm just trying to suggest what it really might be about to be alive at this critical time when so much brokenness is happening, but so much transformation is trying to occur, and how we can find a way to trust that that we're not really alone, that we have a deep self and soul that knows why we're here and how we're aimed, and that if we want to think about the archetypal world, there are energies trying to enter the world through us that have to do with the missing wholeness and the reimagination and revivification of creativity. So that's maybe I'll stop there. I see there are questions. What if depression dampens one's ability to connect with their imagination and or have a consistent practice? I mean, yeah, that happens. So let me just suggest this. Everyone has what I call an emotional zone. And for some people, the emotional zone is volcanic, it's eruptive. It has more to do maybe with anger. And for other people, it's depressive. It has to do with finding oneself repeatedly in a kind of a sullen desert where it's not clear if anything is really alive. And that does dampen things down. But I think there's a kind of imagination there that it isn't necessarily simply a desert with no imagination. And I also think there are practices, and I know there's different levels of depression. I know it's a very hard thing to live with, but I remember once trying to help a young guy, and he was what he call a double depressive, and they were telling him he was going to have to be on drugs the rest of his life and all. And then I heard him playing the saxophone, and I said, well, play some more saxophone. And he's a soulful saxophone player. And I said, take the drugs if you want, but I would really count on that saxophone and let that sorrow or that depression or that sadness find its way through that horn into the world and have it become a creative expression rather than a contraction. And I'm not saying it made his life better and all, but he became a really good saxophone player. So, in a certain sense, go back to the beginning, we have to accept who we are and where. And then I would say then, in terms of the imagination of the soul and the spirit, it's smart to imagine that there is a way to be fully alive there or grow more alive, and that there are practices that can be found and applied there. The surprising thing in life is the deep self or soul knows more than we do who we are and what we're here for. And we just have to find the ways to clear our sense of identity and our over adaptations in order to let that arrive. Can you speak about holding the tension of opposites so that something new can be born out of opposition? Thank you. Yeah. So the polarization of the world now, here in the United States, is really strong. Red states, blue states. And it's just not like they're different. It's like they hate each other. And next thing it becomes pushed into a really thoughtless place where the other side has to be evil. They can only be good and evil and all that. And it's a total misunderstanding of the dynamics of opposites. The tension of opposites is the creative tension. A person gets caught in inner opposition or conflict, not so they have to suffer and have a bad life, but so that they can hold the tension long enough for the third thing to appear, which is not simply one thing or the other. It's a third thing that is created from the tension between the opposition. And so there's a misunderstanding. I know we're in a polarized world, but it's polarized more intensely because people can't see that the tension and the opposition is there to create a third thing. And so that has to be learned personally because it's in the tension between the ego and the deep self. But when I think of people politically and all trying to solve things, and one of the things that doesn't really last or doesn't really mean things in a long time is if you try to get out of the tension by compromising. That compromises everything. The idea, and they've lost this in politics completely, the idea is if the left and the right, or whatever you're going to call them, if each would hold their legitimate place and be true about it, then that tension would create a third thing that neither one of them had known yet. That's how it's really supposed to work. It isn't winner and loser. It isn't just right and wrong. It's opposition for creative tension. What suggestions would you offer to people in groups who are still dreaming about a faraway sweetness instead of being present in the here and now? Well, right now I'd like to join them. Many hold on to past losses and find it difficult to let go, like the monkey in the story. How can they begin? How can they begin to release that grip and look within for nourishment? So we're looking at some group that are dreaming about faraway sweetness. I mean, this is the world. The whole idea of a vacation means to vacate the way you normally live, and not simply to find a good beach, although I'd like to be there, but also to create room for something that changes life from within. And so people have been kind of sold the bill of goods that what we need is out there somewhere. And sometimes it can be, and sometimes we have to go out there to find something that's actually inside. But here's what's happening in the world, strangely enough, especially here in America. Fewer and fewer people are coming here. People don't want to come here. It's dangerous. It's confusing. So people are actually traveling less. There are refugees more than we've ever known, and they're being forced to travel. And then the travel industry is being diminished because the world has become so turbulent. And so I don't know what happens to the people that are, imagining the faraway sweetness. Um, you know, not sure. If personal inner soul transformation on the individual level ultimately shifts culture, systems, and politics over time, can you say something about activism and those of us who feel driven to work for those kinds of shifts in our external world? Well, yeah, I'm not in any way opposed to that. See, the thing about giftedness and genius, there are people who are the geniuses for making change in culture. There are actually people who are the geniuses that should be leading political parties. There are people who have the genius for that. What's happening now is you have people who don't even know who they are running things. And so, what we call activism, which is people who are called to be involved in the social, political, and practical institutional aspects of human community, there are people that have a genius for that. I mean, there are people that are called to it and they can feel fulfilled by it, and we can recognize them as genuine leaders in things. And then there's people that go through a period of activism where the calling is just to get out there and be part of it. And then what I learned in being in the protests was, yeah, you're part of this big thing. And then there's a moment where, who am I in the midst of this? Becoming the activist can lead to an activation of imagination. It can also lead to an activation of love. There's people that go out and protest and fall in love, and they leave the protest and go and work on the love relationship. But I know that I have met people and I've known people who have that genius for activating other people, for giving people agency, and for figuring out how to make agency work for everybody. I don't in any way mean to discount that. And it's not seemingly included in the two roads of practice, but it's another kind of practice. People who are going to practice being agents of creation and healing and change in the outside practical world. It's another kind of practice. It's another kind of genius. As democracy itself is being dismantled in the United States, it seems we might all be being called to collectively fight or resist. Do you think it's possibly why we all came here at this particular time? Not sure, but this is the 250th year of the beginning of the United States. And they're ready in Washington, D.C. to treat it as a kind of pomp and circumstance anniversary. And I think it's really an anniversary of the necessity of reimagining democracy. The thing about what we call democracy, it's like a great, unusual vision. The Constitution is an inspired document. I mean, there's parts of it that don't make that much sense and all that. But the idea that people, unlike each other, could be welcomed into a place and all be supported and have a chance to be part of things. And I know it initially didn't allow that to women or people who weren't white, and that's been a struggle for a long time. But the basic idea transcends the limitations and the kind of conflicts between people, because it has this idea of we the people. And inside that is the idea, and it even says it in the Bill of Rights, in a sense, that each person is unique and valuable and deserves to have opportunity, chance, and deserves to be part of things. That is an essential, meaningful thing. And I think after 250 years, it's trying to renew itself. And yes, we are in a fight to find a way to reconnect to that and take this kind of pretense of democracy and sham level of nationalism out of the hands of people who are simply trying to dominate and do everything for their own benefit. There is at the end of the rite of passage, first, separate from everybody. Second, go through the struggle, the confusion, the disorientation, the descent in the middle. And second, come back to the community with an inspired sense of self. When the young people were coming back for an initiation, they were going to revitalize the community. They'd have their own visions, their own ideas, but they would bring the sense of a renewed spirit. I think if we're in a collective rite of passage, what really is trying to happen is a renewal of the spirit of democracy in the midst of the collapse of human values. And so that's how I see it. And I think to be in the United States, it's never been the United States. It's mostly this United States. But the idea that diverse people could come to one place and live together meaningfully, creatively, not without conflicts, but also find ways to be together and support each other is still a very worthwhile human value and way of trying to make human community. And I think it's trying to, in this so-called anniversary, it is a struggle to find it and bring it more present and make it more genuine again. So I'm with that. I'm hoping to celebrate it somehow, but not in this exaggerated, self-important, world domineering, militaristic way. Not that way at all. More about we the people, more about the surprising unity that's found at the depth of the soul, more about the diversity that makes humanity really creative and really possible. You know, you take the diversity out of a forest, you don't have a forest. You take the diversity out of people and you have something distorted and less than fully imaginative and less than meaningfully inviting and welcoming. If creativity is necessary for these apocalyptic times, would you say that making art is not a selfish act while people are dying under bombs because it helps the creative energy come forward? Yes, I know. See, the idea that things are being destroyed shouldn't mean, oh, I can't do that because it means I'm not holding kind of some kind of unity with the people who are suffering. Think of the painting of Guernica, you know. No, the creative arts. We need songs. I'm amazed in a way that the attempt to revive imagination democracy in America doesn't have more music, doesn't have more songs. Um, no, we participate by being creative in ways that are natural to us. At the same time, we're compassionate for those suffering and we're lamenting those who are lost. Those laments matter. That's how I see it. I've heard you speak about sudden community. How could this idea be helpful at this time? Thank you. So I was just talking about it in a way. So people think that a democracy should come together, straighten some things out, and everything's fine. It doesn't work that way. You straighten some things out, and then a change occurs, and it goes awry. You have to straighten it out again. And so, in the midst of all the confusion, when it's really hard to find and feel and sustain a connection of a community of souls, I started, I started thinking about sudden community. So to me, sudden community is, you see it in these protests. People come together, they don't know each other really, but they have their signs and they have their dreams and they have their longing for meaningful stuff. And for a while, a peaceful protest is a sudden community. But sudden communities can happen all over the place. People come together for healing. People come together for meditative purposes. People come together to do creative things and share them. Sudden community is any way that we can find to be in a shared space together where we welcome and recognize each other as essentially noble souls with unique qualities to bring to life. And you know, like I remember when I was growing up, there was communes and everything, and people were trying to figure out how to get the perfect community that went on and on together. None of them went on and on together. Um, the idea isn't persistent surface community, it's experience of deep communitas. The basis of the word community is the old Latin word communitas, which doesn't mean living near each other. It means something so meaningful, something so sorrowful, something so important, something so creative, or something so necessary happens and people come together without trying to solve their differences. They come together because the depth of communitas draws them together. That's sudden community. And hopefully we'll find more and more ways to do it. People going to a concert are actually going to sudden community, but now you have to pay a really high price. And it's not clear that anybody knows why they're there. Many of the things that have become industrial arts are actually kind of substitutions for sudden community. But so sudden community is my idea of how we can come together with people and we don't have to work out a bunch of agreements. We're just using music or we're using meditation. We're using whatever it is to be together and to commune soul to soul and thereby to reinforce this sense of inner worth and nobility and the deep human values before we go back to the various struggles. Thank you for asking about that. All right. I think I'm going to stop there with Sudden Community. Um, and I started with poems from Rumi. I think I should end with another Rumi poem honoring our old friend Coleman Barks. May he not just rest in peace, but may he find the kind of ancient pool where the poets used to meet. Miss him, miss him. This is his translation of Rumi that's called These Spiritual Window Shoppers. And maybe this goes back to the question that someone asked about how do I know if it's an ego trip that's seeming to be my calling or a real thing? And sometimes that's, don't worry. This is what Rumi says. These spiritual window shoppers who idly ask, well, how much is that? And then say, oh, I'm just looking. They handle 100 items and then put them down. They're like shadows with no capital. Listen, what is spent here is love and two eyes weeping. But these walk into a shop and their whole lives pass suddenly before them in that moment, in that shop. And then someone asks, where did you go? And they say, oh, nowhere. What did you find? Nothing much. Listen, even if you don't know what you want, buy something just to be part of the essential exchange. Start a huge, foolish project like Noah, for it makes absolutely no difference what other people think of you. So that's Rumi trying to say we should all be doing a big, creative, beautiful project. And that's the response to the tearing apart of the world. Thank you again for being interested in this idea of ways to change and the idea of spirit and soul. And I want to go back to the song because old tradition, once you do a song, you have to close with a song. And so we're all going to have to go back to the world gone wrong. But we could go back there maybe with some more ideas and visions and in this moment with a little bit of harmony. Azisona eze makuli Azisona te samani padina Azisona eze makuli Azisona te mamani badina Azisona eze makuli Azisona te samni badana Azisona eze makuli Azisona te mamni badana Azisona eze makuli Azisona te samni badana Azisona eze makuli Azisona te mamni badana Azisona te mamni badana Azisona te mamni badana. Thank you.